So I finished talking about the auricles, those extra folds that are on the top chambers to give a little bit of extra room. Now, right here and here, there are kind of grooves in the heart. And within those grooves are the blood vessels that actually feed the heart and blood vessels that actually take waste away from the heart. Give me 1 second. Okay, lifted up the camera a little. So you've got kind of these grooves in your heart where those blood vessels sit. In the front, you have a groove and it is called a sulcus, okay? So here, you've got the anterior interventricular sulcus. Inter means in between. Ventricular, the ventricles. So you've got this groove in between the two ventricles. Ooh, surprising. Okay. In that, you've got the great cardiac vein, and you've got the anterior interventricular artery, okay? On the back of the heart, if I could pick this up and turn it around, there would be another groove, except it's on the back side. So that would be a posterior interventricular sulcus, still between the two ventricles. That has not changed. Hang on. Forgot to turn the ringer off on my phone, sorry. Okay, so on the back of your heart, you also have a groove, and there are major arteries and veins going through the back, but that groove, the sulcus, if you want to be fancy about saying groove, the sulcus does exist back there. So looking at the ins and outs, who's bringing stuff into my atria? My atria, those two top chambers, are going to be the entry points for my blood. Whether that blood is coming from the body as used and not having a lot of oxygen, or whether that blood is coming in from the lungs so that I can take it and basically spread that oxygen out to the body. So looking at the right side, yes, and I forgot to mention this. So, blue versus red. A lot of people have a tendency to think red means artery and blue means vein, and that's incorrect. All that it means is that red means that it's oxygenated blood, blue means it's deoxygenated blood, okay? Has nothing to do with what kind of tube is carrying it. Now, something else. We do not have blue blood. We've never had blue blood. And for those people that argue and say, no, but when it hits oxygen, it turns red. No. Because if that were the case when you donate blood, then when it went into the bag, it would be blue because the minute it touches oxygen, it starts to clot, which would be really bad if I'm trying to donate blood to somebody, right? It has two shades of red. Very, very bright, almost candy red, and then a dark maroon. The candy red is going to be oxygenated blood. The maroon is going to be deoxygenated blood. Now you're probably going, okay, but why does it look blue when I look? Okay. Wavelength is a funny thing. We view color through the wavelength that it has. So literally, how far are the waves apart from each other? With the maroon blood that is in our arteries, our veins for the most part, because there is some in the arteries, which I'll explain. When it comes through the skin, when the color comes through the skin, it actually changes the wavelength. So we perceive it as being blue, but it isn't actually blue, just so you're aware, okay? So when you look at the heart, you're going to see blue and you're going to see red. All it means is deoxygenated blood, oxygenated blood. Now let's talk about the two major vessels, arteries and veins. Easy way to remember this, arteries away. Arteries will always go away from the heart, not always carrying oxygenated blood, but away, arteries away. Veins always go toward the heart. So you've got arteries coming, or arteries going away, and veins coming toward, okay? So again, keep that in mind. When you're looking at color, it has to do with the oxygenation of what it's carrying, not necessarily what the tube is. Okay. So my atria are my receivers. They're the ones that actually receive the blood first. Okay. They're kind of the preloading chambers. If you look at the right atrium has two major veins coming toward it. This one up here and this one down here. These are called the vena cava. The superior vena cava pretty much drains everything above the heart down into the heart. And the inferior vena cava is actually pretty much carrying everything from down at your toes to the bottom of your heart and up. So the veins are blue because they're carrying oxygen poor blood. There is another vein that empties into that right atrium. Now, you can't see it in this, you can see it in a picture in a minute, but it's called the coronary sinus. Coronary means heart. So the coronary sinus drains the actual heart tissue itself. Something you have to understand, the heart is a working organ, so it's going to need oxygen. It's going to make waste and carbon dioxide. So that blood has to be delivered and then it has to be returned so that it can get reoxygenated. So that coronary sinus is actually draining the heart tissue and putting it into the right atrium so that we can go through our pathway of the blood through the heart. There you go. Okay. So looking at the left atrium, notice that it is red. So that means I've got freshly oxygenated blood going into it, right? See these two here and these two here. They are veins, but they're red. Ta-da! This is kind of a good Jeopardy question. What are the veins in your body that carry oxygenated blood? The pulmonary veins. So, pulmonary, again, fancy way of saying the lungs. So we've got the right pulmonary veins coming in from the right lung, and we've got the left pulmonary veins coming in from the left lung. These two are going to empty into my left atrium. These are coming full of oxygen, so when you see them, they look red. They've got that oxygen-rich blood, okay? Can you not see that? Not at all. I'm going to still pause again. Better. So we've got this oxygen-rich blood coming in from the lungs after picking up oxygen in the lungs. We have the oxygen-poor blood coming in from the body after it's already dropped off its oxygen and picked up carbon dioxide. So what are my escape routes? Dun, dun, dun. All right, so from my right side, remember, right is carrying that deoxygenated blood. Where's it going to want to go? If it's deoxygenated, where do I pick up oxygen? The lungs. So this right ventricle is going to squeeze and shuttle that blood out to the lungs. It comes out through this really, really huge artery called the pulmonary trunk. Again, remember the word pulmonary means lungs. So what does the trunk of a tree do? It branches, right? So you've got the trunk and then there are branches coming off of it. So this pulmonary trunk actually splits into right and left halves, okay? Here's one, here's the other. So the branches of the left pulmonary artery are going to the left lung to pick up oxygen. The branches of the right pulmonary artery are going to the right lung to pick up oxygen. Again, notice that they are blue. They're blue because they are carrying oxygen-poor blood to the location where hopefully they can fill back up, which is going to be the lungs. Now on the left side, we've just gotten in that oxygen-rich blood from the lungs through our pulmonary veins. That left atria puts it into the left ventricle that squeezes really, really hard, and it goes into the aorta. Now, the aorta is our major artery that carries blood everywhere else. So if I'm going into the heart, it's going to go through the aorta. If I'm going to the head, it's going to go through the aorta. If I'm going to the liver, it's going to go through the aorta. This is my exit out of the heart to get to the rest of everywhere. Okay? And again, notice that it's red, so it's oxygenated blood. All right. So blood flow to the coronary blood vessels isn't continuous. Cardiac muscle contracts, blood vessels get compressed, and blood doesn't really flow. Cardiac muscle relaxes, the blood vessels aren't compressed, and blood flow to the coronary blood vessels resumes. All right, so something you have to understand, okay? Blood vessels, if you don't, well, okay. Imagine a water hose, and I want to stop the water flow. What do? Kink, right? If I can't get to the spigot or whatever, I just kink the line and the water stops flowing because literally I've put a kink in the line. Yes? Your heart is living tissue, meaning it has to have oxygen. It has to be able to get rid of carbon dioxide. So imagine having to drop off and pick up with somebody going 70 miles an hour in a car. Get in! Yeah, not going to happen, right? So when your heart compresses to squeeze, it actually kinks the arteries and the veins in the heart. Now you might be going, okay, so it stops the blood flow. And it stops it long enough for the exchange that we need, picking up oxygen, dropping off carbon dioxide, all of that to happen. So when your heart squeezes, it compresses those lines, it kinks those lines just long enough for that exchange to happen. Then when it relaxes, it's like unkinking the line and the blood can flow again. Now, something that's kind of interesting. Well, at least I think it's interesting, but I'm a nerd. So for years and years and years, right, people had been trying to design artificial hearts. Now, the funny thing is, they wanted it to pump. They wanted the squeezing and everything else. The primary reason that happens evolutionarily is because of this. I need that kind of stop so that the tissues in the heart can pick up oxygen and drop off carbon dioxide back in the blood. That's the reason I need that to happen with a living heart. If it isn't living tissue, you don't need that to happen. So years back, there were these two scientists and they came up with this idea to make a 2-pump heart that didn't have a stop. Basically, it was just 2 pumps that kept going and going. That squeeze that kinks the line so that the heart tissue, there's no heart tissue. It's just an artificial heart. It's made out of metal and plastic. There was no reason to do it. Well, they started off with 13 calves, and they replaced their heart with these 2 centrifugal engines that basically just kept the blood going. Cows didn't have a heartbeat because the squeezing is what causes us to go, oh yeah, that's your pulse. Well, actually it's not beating either. But the pulse that we have is because of that stopping that happens when our heart squeezes. So they were fine. They grew up to be cows and everything. And they wanted to try it on a person. Of course, who's going to go, yeah, take out my perfectly good heart and just replace it with what you're experimenting with. There was a man that they found. He had a genetic disorder that was actually a protein disorder. And the proteins that were being made by his body were damaging his organs. And the first organ that it was damaging was his heart. And he basically had like 4 hours left to live. The doctors basically said, we're sorry, there's nothing else we can do. So these guys went and said, so would you like to try this experimental heart? And of course he said, sure. He didn't have anything to lose. He was only going to live for another 4 hours. So they put this artificial heart into his chest and it worked. and he lived for like 8 more months. Now, admitted, 8 months doesn't seem like a long time, but 4 hours compared to 8 months is a long time. And to be honest, it wasn't the artificial heart that caused him to die. That protein disorder I was talking about actually killed his liver, and his liver dying basically was kind of the last straw. His kidneys failed, his liver failed. It just, yeah. But his favorite thing to do, because he was a little stinker, he would go up to people and say, "Can you feel my pulse?" There was no pulse because there was no beating. And they would have, yeah, "You're dying." No, he wasn't dying. He's just a stinker who liked to play practical jokes on people. Anyway, so that is one of my cool stories because, yeah, I think it's a cool story. You probably just think I'm a nerd. And that's okay because, true. Okay, so let's talk about the major arteries supplying the heart tissue. So here is the ghost heart, okay? You can still see the heart. The heart is still there. I don't know that you can see it. Hang on. Can you actually see it now? I'm going to scoot this forward. There you go. Okay, so here's the ghost heart. You can still see the heart. The heart is still there, but you can now also see the arteries, especially those that are kind of hidden under the drawing that we've got. So here's my aorta. There's that aortic arch coming out of my left ventricle, right? Correct? Okay. The two major arteries coming out of your heart are the coronary arteries. As soon as this aorta comes out, you've got these two branches coming out. You've got the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery coming out of here. They are the major arteries that feed that heart tissue. So they exit the aorta just as it leaves the heart, and they lie within the coronary sulcus. Remember, sulcus just means groove. So there's a groove here, and there's another groove here, okay? The right is smaller in diameter than the left. Why? The right side of the heart doesn't really have to have a lot of power behind it because the right side is only sending that blood to the lungs. Here's your heart, here are your lungs, not a real big, great distance. The left, however, has to have enough behind it to actually send it to the top of your head and the bottom of your toes. I have to have enough force behind that to actually send it that great distance. So the left side of your heart is going to be quite a bit bigger, more muscular than the right, meaning it needs a bit of a bigger blood supply. So the right being smaller in diameter makes sense. The right having a smaller hole makes sense. Now, looking on the right side, you have the right marginal artery right here, okay? This supplies blood to the lateral wall of the right ventricle, so to the side of the right ventricle. The posterior interventricular artery, right here, it's coming off of that right coronary artery right here, and it's in the back. That supplies blood to the posterior and inferior region of the heart. So if your heart's sitting like this, it's supplying blood to this part under here, okay? Now, looking at the left side, you've got the anterior interventricular artery, interventricular, between the two ventricles right here, okay? This is going to be the major artery that supplies the anterior heart. So again, if your heart is sitting like this, it's going to supply this part of your heart up here. Now, the left marginal artery. What's the margin of your paper? The side, right? So The left marginal artery supplies the blood to the lateral portion of the left ventricle. Again, remember, medial, middle, lateral to the sides. So this side of the ventricle. Circumflex. I always think of the circumference of a circle, so I always think of going around because it's the circumference of the circle. So the circumflex artery is actually the artery that curves around the heart here. And again, look at where it's going. It's going toward the back. So if it's going toward the back, it's going to supply the posterior portion of the heart, specifically on the left side. Okay? Now, these are the arteries with our ghost heart. Here are the veins with our ghost heart. So here's my right atrium. Okay? Remember I said the coronary sinus is the major vein that drains the heart. There's the coronary sinus, and it's draining into the right atrium right here. Now, notice all of these veins, every single one of them, drains into this before it gets to the right atrium. So when I say the coronary sinus drains everything, that's why I say that. The small cardiac vein, that's this guy right here on the right side. It drains the right margin of the heart, so the right side of the heart, the right lateral side of the heart. That's the small cardiac vein. Did I say great or small? I'm terrible. Sorry. Small cardiac vein does that. Now here's the great cardiac vein. It lies in the interventricular sulcus, so in that groove. So the great cardiac vein is draining the left side of your heart, most of this over here, okay? Small, right margin, great, left, okay? And yes, there are others, but those are the major ones I want you to know. All right, so we cut the heart in half so you can see inside. This is the worst picture ever, and I know that, but it was one of the only pictures that I could show you the two atria with the septum in the middle. See this piece right here? Yes, I hope. This is dividing these two atria from each other, making them separate chambers, okay? So this is going to be the interatrial septum. Inter, in between, atria, the two atria, septum, dividing, okay? I'm going to turn the lamp back on. So we've got the interatrial septum, which is what that says, but it's cut off because of whatever is going on with this guy. The foramen ovale or the fossa ovalis. So when you are in your mother's womb, there's no reason to breathe. You really shouldn't, because you're going to drown in amniotic fluid because it's fluid. So there is no reason to send blood to your lungs. So instead of it going to the right ventricle, which is responsible for the pulmonary circulation, it goes from your right atrium to your left atrium to your left ventricle and then out to the body. Because when you're in mother's womb, the hemoglobin that you have, the fetal hemoglobin that you have, steals the oxygen from mom. There's no reason for breathing. There's no reason to send anything to the lungs. So there is a hole in between the left atria and the right atria, okay? And it's called the fossa ovalis or the foramen ovale, depending on who teaches you. Same thing, two different names. Okay. In a perfect world where unicorns and dragons exist. See Toothless? Anyway, in a perfect world where dragons exist, the moment that you are born, that thing seals shut and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Most of the time, it doesn't perfectly seal. So because it doesn't perfectly seal like it's supposed to, most of the time you end up with a heart murmur as a baby. And a lot of times doctors will be like, oh, don't worry about it. And the main reason is because it's fairly normal for that to happen. And because it's normal for that to happen, they don't think anything about it because eventually it'll seal and everything will be fine. Okay, so that's the foramen ovale or the fossa ovalis. So the right atrium, I'm going to switch pictures because I hate this one. All right, so the right atrium, that's this guy right here. It has 3 openings. The superior vena cava drains into it there. The inferior vena cava drains into it here. And then this is the coronary sinus, that hole from the back, okay? Now, your left atrium. Remember we had the pulmonary veins coming in from the left lung and the right lung? Well, they're the same size. So you've got 4 uniform openings that all drain into this left atrium. Now, yeah, okay. I was like, where did the other one go? Okay. So we've got the ventricles now, the bottom half of the heart, all right? And just like with the atria, we've got this piece of tissue that separates the 2 ventricles from each other. This is the interventricular septum. Inter, in between, ventricular, the ventricle, septum, the dividing thing, okay? It's a thick muscular piece of tissue that separates the left from the right ventricle. Each ventricle has 1 large superiorly placed outflow route near the midline. So there's one outflow route, there's another near the midline, near the middle of the heart. Now I want you to notice something. Look at the size of the muscle on this side and look at the thickness of the muscle on this side. Do you see a difference? This one's about twice as thick as that is. Remember what I said about the right side is only going from your heart to your lungs. That's not very far. I don't need a lot of power behind that. The left side, however, has to have enough squeeze to get it top of your head, bottom of your toes. Even when you're looking at a real heart, if you cut a heart in half and mix it up and show it to somebody, anybody will be able to tell the difference from the left from right because of the thickness of that wall. The left will always have the more muscle because it has to pump to the rest of the body. Okay, so the right ventricle down here, it opens into the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so I've got the right atrium sending blood through this guy right here into the right ventricle. I've got the left atrium up here getting, atrium, sending blood down through here, which I'm going to talk about in a second, into the left, ventricle. And then that pumps out into the aorta. You can actually, if I could move this, I would. This tube is the exit for that blood, and that's the aorta. So let's talk valves. Let me double check something again. Okay. Semilunar valves. Semi, half, luna. What does luna mean? Moon, right? So we've got these semilunar valves. They're composed of 3 pocket-like semilunar cusps, which is just a fancy way of saying flaps, okay? In the free inner borders actually meet in the center. So this is one of those, this is the other. And like I said, the valves are kind of, okay, when they meet, they seal, but if you push from the bottom direction, they'll open, okay? So you've got 2 of these. You've got the pulmonary trunk one right here, which is the pulmonary semilunar valve. And yes, I want you to use pulmonary semilunar valve, not just the semilunar valve, because that's not right. And then you've got this one here in the aorta, which is the aortic semilunar valve, okay? And literally, when this squeezes, when your right ventricle squeezes, it forces this pulmonary semilunar valve to open and sends the blood into the pulmonary trunk, which splits into the branches of the right pulmonary artery and the left pulmonary artery. The aortic semilunar valve is the exit for my left side of my heart. So when the left ventricle squeezes, it opens the aortic semilunar valve, pushing the freshly oxygenated blood up into the aorta and into the rest of the body. Okay, I'm going to stop there and I'll start again in a minute.